Congressman Kelly serves on the House Ways and Means Committee, the Congressional Steel, Manufacturing, Natural Gas, Marcellus Shale Caucuses, and the Congressional Automotive Caucus. Congressman Kelly also owns car dealerships. He's a member of the Congressional Caucus on Korea, too. Is there anything you're not involved in? David Sherman, executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joins us for this morning's discussion. Congressman, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. I guess Merry Christmas. It's the fourth day of Christmas.
Yes.
Happy New Year to you.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be quite a different Congress when you go back in January. What does it mean now that the Senate is Republican controlled along with the House of Representatives?
Well, I think the greatest gain now is America's going to get a chance to watch how this model is supposed to work, how it's supposed to work for the best of the American people. One of the things that I think that has been, the last couple of years has been shielded is that there's an awful lot of legislation that's gone through the House, gone over to the Senate, and it's been tabled. And people keep saying, well, you know what? If you guys could just work together. I said, well, in the House of Representatives, we've been able to come together. Most of this legislation, by the way, is bipartisan. It's gone to the Senate, but Mr. Reid had tabled it for one reason or another. And I think the people started to wonder, well, this isn't a model that works. And say, of course not. It has to go through both chambers, and it has then, at that point, to get either passed or turned down. And if it gets passed, it has to go to the White House, and the president then gets involved in a very public way. So the biggest challenge I think we're going to have starting off is we're going to have a Senate that we can work with. I think for the American people, though, it's a very slow and deliberative process once it gets to the Senate. I think we're going to see things happen, of course, much quicker than they've had the last couple of years. But again, the progress will start off, the trajectory will not be maybe as strong or as fast as people would like to see, but you're going to see two parties able to function together, two chambers able to function together to get things done for the American people.
Do you really think that's going to happen? Because I remember certainly back in my days in Washington, D.C., when you had the same control both houses, something would pass the House, it would still not get through the Senate. The Senate is a very peculiar body. I mean, is there some magic there? Do you think that you're going to get the Senate, even under control of Republicans, to take up issues that the House has approved?
Well, I think what we're going to see is a very visible Senate, and I think that's the thing the American people have been missing. And you're right. The Senate was always supposed to be the more deliberative. They'd say to the people in the House, look, you guys have your arguments, go back and forth, but at the end of the day, try and get something down the hall to us. And they called them the graybeards because they were supposed to be, you know, slow it down, get under control, have your arguments in the House, get it to us, and we'll weigh in on it, and we'll make it better or more palatable. So I think we're going to see a process that pretty much is baked into the model that we have. I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, one of the things Speaker Boehner has said, look, the first 6 or 7 months, my biggest job is going to be pouring some cool water on the heads of some of you that want to see things go at a lightning speed. Remember, the greatest opponent of the House has always been the Senate. So keep in mind, we're going to have the open discussion, we're going to have the debate, we're going to have the amendment process, but it's not going to be at warp speed. It's going to travel forward, but maybe slower than we first anticipated.
Now, Congressman Kelly, first of all, there's an unusual number of former House members in the new Senate, so that might help a little bit. But it was a different role you played, Republicans, in the House when there was a Democratic Senate. You had to be responsible, but not at all that responsible. Now you're responsible for a complete 100% of the legislative branch of the United States government. Does that change the way things operate?
Well, I think the last couple of years we really have been the backstop. We've been the firewall. The president's first 2 years in office, he had big majorities in the House and the Senate. Some of the legislation that was fast-tracked that got through was done in such a manner that nobody had seen that before. In the first 2 years the president was in office, successful agenda any president had seen. I think what we've been able to do the last couple of years, slow it down, try to get the spending under control, because, you know, people still say we're still operating way beyond what we bring in. We got to be careful with how we're spending our money. So I think the concentration is going to be on pieces of legislation that make sense to the American people. We have got to restore the faith and trust the American people need to have in this form of government. That's going to be our #1 objective.
Well, let me ask you about specific issues, because I think there's so many issues that you can tackle as a Congress. Are there some that you see as a priority issue as we go into January?
Yeah, I think when we still look at the #1 concern most people have is the economy. And it's hard for me to sit back at this point in my life and look at all the assets that we have. A lot of them gifts from God. that we haven't made the most out of. And a very robust and dynamic economy is what's required to do all these wonderful things we like to do. Whether it's at home or abroad, it still takes great revenue. So
specifically, though, is Congress going to pass a jobs bill? And what is it that Congress needs to do to deal with the economy, or nothing?
Yeah, well, no. We're going to do a lot of things. Number one thing probably will be the Keystone Pipeline. I think overwhelmingly it has support on both sides with the American people also, that this is a project that doesn't cost the American taxpayer one penny. It's an $8 billion build. The projected revenue is about $2 billion, about 40-some thousand jobs, and then all the ancillary jobs that go with that. And what I mean by that is not just the people building the pipeline, but look in our state, at Pennsylvania.
Let's stop there just for 1 second, Congressman Kelly. Do you have a veto-proof majority on the Keystone?
When you say a veto-proof majority...
I mean, if the president vetoes that...
Oh, that's up to the president. You know,
I know. Well,
it has
I know.
to go to his desk.
Of course, and then he'll veto it, and then you need a supermajority to override his veto. Can you do that?
Well, here's what I think we can do. I think we can prove to the American people that we can govern. And governing means do what's best for the American people. It may not just be a truly Republican, deep red bill. It may not be a deep blue bill that Democrats on the far left would like. What about just doing things that make sense to the American people? What about doing things? Now, when you talk about the veto proof, it's going to be very hard for the President of the United States to have a piece that comes before him that has such a positive effect on the American economy and say, I'm not going to pass this because I have a few people in my party that say it's not good for the way they think. And at that point, the American people are going to start to wonder about, wait a minute, where's the obstruction coming from? We kept hearing it was the Republicans in the House of Representatives. Now you have a House that's working with the Senate to get things put through that go to the president's desk. And the president then is going to be the deciding yes or no.
That's a good argument, but I still think the president will veto the Keystone Pipeline.
Well,
here's the other question.
Yes.
You hit the nail on the head, Congressman Kelly. You have to govern. The Republicans have to govern, which means you're going to have to pass more than 10 appropriations bills, and you're going to have to pass a budget resolution that the president has no veto power over.
Right.
Can you do that?
Well, I think that everything is laid in place that we can do that. I would never work in hypotheticals, say, don't worry, we're not going to have a problem with this. The appropriations process, us being in regular order, well, we debate, and we finally sit down. Now, I'll talk about the House, because we always hear, John, right? Well, you guys have the power of the purse. You can kind of let things go forward or stop. Well, when we're in regular order, we have the ability to go through the appropriations process. When we do a continuing resolution, a CR, we're ceding over then to the executive branch to spend the money. Pretty much we'll give you the money we had before you figure out how to spend it. One of the things that I found very objectionable. Now, listen, I'm a Republican. But this is what I found objectionable. Look, if you don't have the courage of your own convictions, if you don't want to stand up and say this is the way we should do business and this is the way we should appropriate the monies, don't turn it over to the executive branch and then find fault with them when you had the control of the checkbook or the credit card to begin with and you turned it over to the executive branch.
You may have the courage of your convictions, but do you have the convictions of your courage? Are you going to be able to? Are you going to be able to pass more than 10 appropriations bills?
Yeah, and I think yes, and I think we're going to transition from doing what's right politically to doing things that make sense from a policy standpoint. That's what the American people need to see.
I think what's going to be interesting, and I think one of the challenges, David, that you're suggesting here is that if the Republicans take a hard line on issues and the president takes a hard line on issues, we're just going to have 2 more years of gridlock, just like we've had for the last 4 years. And so the question will be, are Republicans prepared to compromise? Is the president prepared to compromise in some way in the year ahead so that there is actual legislation that passes both chambers and gets signed? It doesn't do anyone good, it seems to me, to have you guys pass bills and the president veto them because you can't reach an agreement. Do you think there's a spirit? I mean, the way it seems so often is that people are just so partisan and so unwilling to try to find the common ground. Do you feel that that's going to change as we move into 2015?
Yeah, I do, and I'll tell you one great example. A good friend of mine, a guy named Pat Toomey, has worked very hard with another good friend of mine.
Our U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
Another good friend of mine, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Right. There's a Republican and a Democrat that have worked very hard to do legislation that would make sense for the American people. And now they've been criticized by friends on both sides of, you know what, it's not far enough to the right for me, it's not far enough to the left for me, and let's torpedo this before it even gets out of the chute. Whenever you have leadership allowing you to bring forth legislation that, while may not be perfect, is certainly works to reestablish the faith that the American people have. I think we're going to see that. And I'll tell you why I think we're going to see it. Right. I think if we have a blind eye and a deaf ear to what the American people have been saying, shame on us. They're looking for a model that works. This one was always designed from the beginning to have the confrontation, but it also said at the end, come together, make something that makes sense for the American people, and I think we'll do that.
We're going to have to take a break in just a minute here, but before we get to that, and we'll get into some specific issues. I want to talk about Obamacare, for example. But let me just ask you, you're on the House, which is an important tax writing committee. What do you see in our last minute of this segment? What do you see as the role of that in this whole discussion of the budget?
Well, I think when you look at the lack of growth in America, you can certainly look at our tax code. 78,000 pages with carve-outs in there for certain people and not other people. Pro-growth tax reform is something that has to take place. Chairman Camp have been trying to do that in the last session. We invited the public in to view it, the private sector. I think with Chairman Ryan now, we're going to have a renewed effort. It may not be the same direction that Chairman Camp wanted to go in, but you're going to see both sides, Ways and Means Committee, come together. Tax reform is absolutely critical if we're to succeed.
How about a tax code that we can read? Tax forms that we can fill out. Well, I mean, we laugh about that, but I'll tell you, it's just, to me, it's amazing. We're almost in tax season here. We're all going to be getting our W-2s and starting to do our taxes, and we've gotten to the point now where everybody needs to go hire somebody or go to one of the places.
That's a jobs program too, John.
I guess it is a jobs program.
But keep in mind, fellas, now, last year, Americans spent $167 billion on tax preparation and about 3.5 billion hours.
$167 billion.
What if they just donated that to the Treasury?
Well, but how about this? How about this? Don't you think that time and money could have been spent in a better way that would have been better for the country?
Well, you're going to be hearing from a lot of accountants tomorrow.
No, you know what? Listen, when one window closes, another opens, and I will tell you, there's always going to be plenty of business for those folks.
Well, I'll just settle for a tax code that I can understand. Well, we've got to take a quick break. We're going to be back with Congressman Mike Kelly in just a few moments.
And I think when I first got into office, everybody was saying, well, listen, we'll get to this right after the election. And I said, well, my goodness, there's an election every year. I mean, there's always something of consequence. So if you're going to allow policy to be trumped by politics, it makes it very difficult to get things done. Now, on the other hand, if you say that good policy will attract folks and get them on board, then we can move forward. But, we got a presidential election coming up. It's very, very...
So you got about 7 to 12 months, because pretty soon the Democrats are not going to want you to succeed, because they want to say, here, the do-nothing 113th Congress or whatever. And then the Democrats are going to want certain things to be defeated for partisan views, and you're going to want certain things not to come up for equally partisan views, and it's going to be a whole holy mess again. So how much time do you have?
Well, time is always something you never have enough of. Right. I would just say this. If we can go into session and really focused on an American success story, then we can get things done. We're going to have to back off on some of the things that we say, look, I am just this way. If it's not my way, I'm not going to vote for it. Right. And the question becomes, do you have enough people in your conference right now? I'm talking about Republicans. Do you have 218 Republicans that will help get that initiative through the House? The last piece we just did on the omnibus or cromnibus, whatever you want to call it, we relied on a lot of people from the other side to help get that piece into legislation and get it across the finish line. So I think we're going to have that back and forth. Now, those who are really have their convictions and can't back away from, you know what, I understand that. The Speaker has always said, you vote at the end of the day what's in your heart. I'll never criticize you for doing that. So I think you look at things very objectively, and you're never going to get exactly what you want, but you start looking at what's best for the people we represent.
Now, Congressman Kelly, speaking of the presidential election, which is only about 23 months away, 22 months away, how the Republicans are going to sort this out? They've got 3 probable establishment figures and about 18 insurgents all running for the presidency. How is this going to sort out?
And let me just add an addendum. Do you have a favorite candidate yet?
Or are you running?
Well, right.
To make news here. Nobody from the House is running. So
nobody from the House is running. I really do believe that the executive position, the greatest executive position in the world, somebody running for that is somebody who's actually should have run something in the past, whether it's an executive position in government or in the private sector. You've got to know how to get things together.
Governors over senators?
I think governors over senators over congressmen. I think I'm fine with that.
Okay.
The ability to legislate is one
crowd a little bit. Governor Christie, maybe?
I like Governor Christie. I like
Governor Romney, Governor Bush.
Well, you hit on somebody. People ask me. I said I would look at a person whose name is pretty much known from coast to coast, east to west, north to south, and all the way up into Alaska. Governor Romney is well known now. I think the critical part of it in the last election is we put our candidates through an unbelievable primary process. They were debating 2 or 3 times a week, and I thought, my goodness.
Well, you won't do that again.
Well, let's hope not. It's a waste. I think it's a waste of time, and I think it pulls people in too many different directions.
You had 20 debates last time.
20, is that all? It seemed like a lot more than that. It seemed like every other day we had a debate.
But there are debates scheduled already.
Right.
I think in the presidential primary, even though we're still sorting out who all the candidates are. You know, I did want to touch on a couple other issues.
Sure, let's do that.
Let's do real quick first Obamacare, and then I want to move to some foreign policy issues. Obamacare. Some people thought this last election was a referendum on Obamacare. Others disagree. There are lots of things about the Affordable Care Act that people like, but there are other things that people don't like. Where do you see what's going to happen, if anything, in this Congress? Or is it just a done deal with the president in office? Nothing's going to change for the next 2 years.
Well, I would just say this. Any initiative we would put forward as a Republican initiative, it has to get through the Senate or the president's desk at the end of the day. I don't see him saying, yeah, I'm going to go along with that. But we have the American Health Care Reform Act, Republican. It's been up for almost 4 years now. I'd like people to take a look at that. Our idea was to invite everybody in, weigh in on it. Let's come up with something that makes sense. I know in our own business, it's very difficult for those of us in the private sector who provide health care for our folks to look at the cost of health care. Look at the deductibles, what's going forward. And it really puts people in a very difficult position. First of all, hard to buy a policy that covers everything they want. And the deductibles are so high. You say between what I'm paying for my monthly benefit and what my deductible is to be met, it's skyrocketed. It hasn't done what it was supposed to do, and that was affordable care. Affordable care.
Well, you know, it always seems to me that the Republicans talk about repeal, and they often use the word, Governor Romney used the words repeal and replace.
Right.
But it's never clear what the replacement is. Well, is there a Republican replacement policy for the Affordable Care Act?
In the American Health Care Reform Act, which we have, and it's been out there for some time, there is a replace piece in there. It's not complete in that we say is we want everybody at the table. Everybody. Right. From the private sector, we want the patient there, we want everybody there. I think one of the disconnects on this was, so what about me? What about me as a private person? How do I get to determine what's best for me and best for my loved ones? And those were the people that were taken out of the equation. Not good. Our piece was actually to be between the patient and the doctor, allow them to decide what was best for that person, that individual. And I think we got away from that.
So you're suggesting, though, that for the next 2 years while Barack Obama is in office, the chances of repealing or substantially changing Obamacare are pretty close to nil.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we'll let the American people make a decision on a piece of legislation that's easier to read. We talked about the tax code. Right. Anybody try to read the PPACA?
But the president's going to veto.
And you know what? And I know that, but isn't that the beauty of our process? That we can have the open debate, we can have the discussion, we can decide at the end of the day what's best for all Americans. Yeah. Not because it was the president's signature piece of legislation.
But I keep coming back to the point that I don't think a Congress passing something and the president vetoing it doesn't get us anywhere.
No, but what it does do, Joe,
where they want to get. It positions them both.
But it doesn't accomplish anything for the American public, and that comes from that dirty word, that dirty C word, compromise. Yeah. So let me turn to a couple of quick foreign policy questions. Have you seen the interview of all this controversy over North Korea?
No, I haven't seen the interview.
Are you concerned at all about computer hacking coming out of North Korea or China, for that matter? Is this something that the Congress can address in any way, or is this just a private industry security issue?
I think we're in much greater risk than it's been portrayed. Mike Rogers, who's the chair of the Intelligence Committee, now he's going out of Congress. I attended a briefing, and I just be real careful about the way I say this. It was pretty high level. And after it was over, I stayed to talk to him. He said, Mike, what's wrong? You didn't leave with the rest of the group. I said, I just want to ask you something, Mike. You said that there are 2 companies that exist in the United States now today. Those that are being hacked into and know it, those that are being hacked into and don't know it. And that goes from people who produce fertilizer to those in pharmaceuticals. The ability to disrupt our entire economy is the key to this. My question has always been, why would we put our most valuable and vulnerable information into something that is so easily hacked into? Now, people don't like to talk about it. You take China and Russia, this is a 24 hours a day, 365 day a year initiative to hack into everything that America does. We can't afford to have that. My goodness, if it was happening in the open market, people were coming into banks and stealing money, people were going into corporations and stealing their ideas and their people, we would say, my God, what an act of aggression this is. We're talking about something or minimizing what is done. When we come back to Sony with that, what in the world would North Korea make a statement that you show that movie and you'll have greater results than you had on 9/11. Really? So anybody can say to us, you do this, you go ahead, and we're going to make it so hard and you won't do it again. That's the definition of terror. You can't allow people to do that. And when we allow that to happen, we diminish who we are as a people, and we no longer become the defenders of liberty and freedom around the world. We those who cower in the corner, too. I say, meet them head on. Don't let them get away with that stuff. It's not up to them to determine. Our Constitution allows us to do that. Whether I agree with the movie or don't agree with the movie, that's not the point. I don't want somebody telling me, you can't do that. That's just not who we are.
Are we doing what we should be doing, though, as a country? Is there something Congress should be doing in this area, or the executive branch when it comes to computer hacking? Are we doing all that we should?
I think we're doing as much as we can right now, but there's great ideas out there about how to fix it even greater. I would be greatly concerned as any individual. Now, this is not Mike Kelly as a congressman talking to you. This is Mike Kelly as a fellow American. When people have access to everything that you have in your life and can get in it and get out of it without you even knowing it, there's a problem there. That's not who we are as a people, and we should never, ever cower away from those who try to take that away.
Normalizing relations with Cuba. We've talked to a lot of people around here. There are pros and cons on this. What's your feeling?
There's pros and cons in the Republican caucus and even among presidential candidates.
Right, that's true.
Rand Paul and Marco Rubio don't agree on this.
No, they don't. And we've done some legislation with Senator Rubio. I would just say this. When we look at it at the end of the day, we're looking at a president who goes outside the scope of his powers or what his intended powers were. Now, whether it's the Cuban situation or when we negotiate on Bo Bergdahl or whenever we do these different things, I don't think the president should wait till Congress goes out of session and then make big decisions on big issues and then say, look, I was just tired of waiting. We've been waiting too long for immigration. I'm going to do it myself. The issue, though, but John, the issue is an overreach by the president on what he's supposed to. There's a reason our model exists and why it succeeds. Congress needed to be involved in that. I don't like the fact that he leapfrogged it and said, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Now, when it comes to embargoes, I'll still have to go back to those guys and get to them.
But recognizing foreign nations has always been a presidential prerogative. President Roosevelt, FDR, recognized the Soviet Union in 1933. He didn't go to Congress and say, give me approval for that. That's not something that traditionally happens. You're absolutely right, though. Changing the trade relationships, the embargo itself, will require support from Congress. Are you prepared to support efforts to normalize trade relations with Cuba at this stage?
I'm in a position or of a mind that when I talk to my friends and their Cuban background, heritage, they're greatly concerned. There's not another country that has a worse record of taking care of human freedoms and liberties than Cuba. I think we kind of set a dangerous precedent when we say, well, we've been waiting too long for these things to work. I mean, my goodness, we just gave up 3 convicted spies to get back Mr. Gross. I'm sure his family's happy about that, and somebody who we think was imprisoned for the wrong reasons. At what point, then, do people around the world look at us and say, here's all we have to do, grab a couple of those?
We've run out of time. There's